So we are recording, and this is going to be part of our Saving the Saviors webinar for our first responders, spouses, significant others, and family members. And right now I'd like to welcome Michael. He's going to introduce himself in a minute and share with us a little bit about what he can bring to the topic of what spouses and significant others and family members might need to understand about what someone goes through and their daily work, and then it's compounded now even more so with other things. So Michael, I'd like you to introduce yourself.
My name is Michael Ackerman. I spent 14 years in law enforcement, started out in Arizona, and then moved back home to South Carolina in 2009. Spent a total of 8 years with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, my final 8 years in law enforcement. I'm married. I have a beautiful daughter who is 12, who's special needs. And I currently live in the mountains of Western North Carolina.
That sounds great. So what are you doing right now with as a profession?
I work for the North Carolina Department of Public Safety. I'm a juvenile court counselor, which is better known as a juvenile probation officer. However, here in North Carolina, it's more, we do a lot of social worker type of things with the juveniles, a lot of pretrial interventions. We do a lot of case coordination. We also do some counseling as well, along with the typical probation officer type of duties.
Okay, great. Well, it's good to hear all of that. So you're still really involved in kind of a leg of law enforcement, but sort of at the other end of that, sort of working with the youth.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about some of the stress that you experienced in your law enforcement life. And what would have been helpful to you from a spouse, family member, maybe a girlfriend if you weren't married at the time? Just kind of share, some of the stressors you had and what was helpful and what was harmful, if you can delve into that a bit.
Sure. I think one of the big things that a lot of new officers or first responders, for that matter, whether it be firefighter, EMT, or law enforcement, what they don't understand is the physiological toll that the job takes on you just from your normal day-to-day experiences. Your body is put through just an immense amount of stress from adrenaline dumps on a daily basis, multiple times a day, not just a daily basis, but on a multiple times a day. And those kinds of things really negatively affect your body. And I wasn't prepared for that. And then you add on top of that the mental stress of just the normal day-to-day of doing the job. I mean, you have to deal with death, and you have to not only do you have to deal with death, but you have to basically objectify death so that you can get through and do your job. You have to be able to look at a dead body and be able to do a job. You can't become emotional about it. Not there. You have to see the worst in people, and you can't become emotional about it. You have to stay objective, and you have to be able, because you have a job to do. And, new people to this profession usually aren't warned about how that affects you, because it all affects you one way or another. You change in this line of work. And sometimes that change is very minimal. And sometimes that change is very extreme, depending on the type of person you are, your background, the type of career you have. But you will change. And that's something, I don't think is really impressed upon people. And as far as, family members and stuff, I think probably I don't really think that family members hold a responsibility um, to do anything specific, because a lot of times they don't know what they're getting into either. Here's a law enforcement officer who's going through all the training and everything that's being provided, and they really don't know what they're getting into until they get into it. Family members receive no training whatsoever, which I think is wonderful of what y'all are doing. I think it's very important that family members understand kind of what is going to happen to their loved one when they get into this career field. But more importantly, it's just as important for the first responder to understand that whatever they go through, their family member is going to go through it too, because they love them and they're going to go on that ride with them. And they didn't sign up for it. They didn't go to the academy, whether the fire academy or paramedic training or law enforcement. They didn't go through all. They didn't choose this profession. They chose us. And a lot of times law enforcement officers or first responders in general forget that whatever ride we're going on, our loved ones are going on with us, and they didn't choose it. So I think, the onus is more on the first responder to remember and to empathize with the fact that their loved ones are having to deal with whatever that the first responder is dealing with. And again, I can't say enough, what y'all are doing is just very, very important for a healthy family, a healthy first responder. It's just very, very important.
Right. Well, that's what you just said was kind of interesting, where it's like you're in this training and you're going to come out and start working and you're going to change. So you probably feel like, or maybe hear, some first responders may hear from their loved one or family members, well, you've really changed, or you're not the same person you used to be, or whatever, just because you're affected by all these stressors. I mean, it could affect, like you were saying, physiologically, it's going to change you. I mean, I can imagine, sleep deprivation and all of those things because of the day you may or may have had could be so stressful. So, yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what is one thing that you wish you knew when you became a law enforcement officer that impacts family life? If there's like one thing that you could think of, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot. You probably, I mean, you and I've chatted a lot in the summer, and so that's why you're such a perfect candidate for this interview. But if you could think of one or two things that we can share with family members that you wish you knew.
Gosh, from the first responder point of view, I think it goes back to what I was just saying. The number one thing is to remember that your loved ones, they chose you. They didn't choose the job. That's your choice. That was my choice. That was our calling to do this type of profession. And our family members, they have other callings and stuff, and their professions have stresses as well. And I don't think that I was prepared to understand that whatever I went through, I was bringing my loved ones along with me. I think that was a very eye-opening kind of revelation for me, is to understand that everything that I experienced, even though I may have tried to shield people who cared about me from it, they were still experiencing it, because one way or another, I was exhibiting that, whether it be that I closed myself off from them, or maybe I was a little more emotional about something, or my humor went to the toilet. I mean, all first responders, we all have horrible senses of humor, and that's how we deal with the traumatic events. We have to remember that sometimes our family members, they don't share that same kind of sense of humor, and they don't want to hear that. We use it as a coping mechanism, but again, they didn't sign up for it. They don't experience it. They didn't get the same kind of training. They don't have to compartmentalize the horrible things that we do on a day in, day out basis. Um, so that was something that I really think I wish I had had more knowledge about as I went into it. That's really the main thing. The other thing I would say, and it is more of a practical thing, probably beyond just the stresses of the job, the most stressful thing for first responder families is always finances. And I wasn't, nobody really taught us about, you need how to properly financially plan to alleviate the stress that your family's going to feel. Because again, it's such a stressful type of career field anyway. We don't get paid very much money. And that creates even more stress. And then you have officers or firefighters who are working double shifts or triple shifts or working 2 or 3 jobs because they're living beyond, their means, which then creates even more stress on top of an already stressful career field, which creates even more stress within the family. That I think that's something very important with new families in the first responder field to properly financially plan and budget. I always told my new trainees that don't ever use your overtime as part of your budget. Your budget is your base salary, and that's what you should plan your life around. Anything that you get above that should go into some sort of special fund for a vacation or for, something special within the family. But don't ever use overtime as part of your budget, because you could get hurt and you'll lose that overtime. You could be involved in a shooting, as I was, and be placed on administrative leave, and you lose the overtime, and you're back to your base salary. And those are very important things to remember, because most of the time, first responders, if they're going to get in trouble with their marriage or just in general, which is going to lead them down the wrong path, it's usually financial. And it's very important.
I remember when we talked this summer, and that was one thing that I took away from this, as you had said to me, yeah, that's one of the big things that budgeting and that financial planning needs to be something that spouses or significant others actually are involved with the first responder, the law enforcement officer, so that they can kind of, figure out that don't count that overtime as part of your base salary, which would be so tempting to do, especially for a young family. You're always, you need furniture, you need this, you need that. Then, a baby may come into the picture. It just kind of seems to like mushroom out of control. And that would be something that would be so helpful for families. That's really great. Can you offer some advice to family members as their law enforcement officer copes with the added stress of COVID-19 and the social unrest that has really become so, the social unrest really that kind of erupted since the beginning of the year, more than usual. But COVID, I mean, when you go on a call, you're not sure whether you're going to pick up something because someone may or may not be careful, or they may or may not be sick. So there's this whole new stress level. So what do you think there?
Honestly, as far as COVID is concerned, that's not, when you talk to any first responder, any properly trained first responder, whether it's COVID, whether it's HIV, whether it's Hep B, whether it's tuberculosis, whether it's really any kind of communicable disease like that, there's always that risk. COVID is just another one on that plate. I don't think it's, we were always trained to treat people with respect, but also treat them as, as potential carriers of something. So we, be careful, use your PPE properly and common just safety practices.
Mhm.
as far as COVID is concerned. I don't, for a first responder, um, it's not something that is beyond the pale
Mhm.
as far as anything additional to worry about. Um, I think the hysteria around it, and I don't want to get political, but I think the hysteria around it has created more stress about it than, so more people are focused on it, I should say. But the truth is, in law enforcement and firefighting and EMT work, you're exposed to all kinds of, bloodborne pathogens. I mean, I've been spit on, I've been bled on, I've had people defecate on themselves, urinate on themselves. So, COVID is just another one of those things that, you just got to be careful of.
Okay.
To the social unrest part, that is a big challenge now. I think a lot of law enforcement officers are feeling attacked from all sides. I think they feel attacked from the media, which has been going on for a few years.
Mhm.
Really started after Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, um, and has just kind of snowballed from there. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of false narratives placed out there about first responders. Um, and it does place a tremendous amount of stress. I know that there are families who are taking extraordinary precautions right now as far as their own personal safety, removing stickers from their cars. If they have take-home vehicles, not necessarily parking them in front of the house, and taking more care. And those kinds of things, what we deal with at work is one thing, but when it directly affects your family's safety, that's a whole nother level of stress. And that's one of the things that's happening right now is there are a lot of, not only is the first responder bringing their job home with them internally,
Mhm.
but the home is no longer a safe place. It used to be, you come home, you take off your uniform, you can just, you can shed that. But
Right.
now you really can't do that.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, you have to be vigilant 24/7 more than before. You have to have uncomfortable talks with your family, with your kids. I know that before I got out in law enforcement, and I got out in 2018,
Mhm.
we were talking to trainees and families about, you got to talk to your kids about, don't yell that my daddy's a police officer. You don't want a parent to yell that in a restaurant. Oh, I'm so proud of you. You're a police officer. Um, and it's not because we don't understand the pride, but it's a safe, that is something that I encourage um, agencies and law enforcement officers, first responders, to sit down with families and talk about this openly and share concerns. If you're a spouse and you're concerned, share those concerns with your first responder spouse. Parents, same thing. Talk to your kids about safety, um, things of that nature. Unfortunately, we have to have those kinds of conversations now. And again, it adds to the stress
Right.
of that whole, just not just the first responder, but the entire family itself.
Right. Becomes like almost like a toxic level. It's like, okay, there was stress before. Now sometimes, you might come home and, with COVID, I know there's, that there's a chance that you could come home with it, and then then the whole family could get sick, and grandma might, get sick, and maybe, it is kind of a thing that we all worry about more than we did about a few other things that weren't as prevalent as it is right now with COVID. But, the social unrest and the fact that, you're just being watched all the time. You have to watch everything you do or say. Um, you know, it's got to be extra stress for family members to worry when you leave the house that, if it's a bad week in the country. I mean, how's that going to be for my family, you know? So,
Well, and if I may add, also another big stress with all of this that's going on, and we're seeing this play out in the media over and over again. Um, you could do everything correctly as a law enforcement officer, as a first responder. You could do absolutely everything correctly
mhm,
by the book within the guidelines of the law,
mhm,
and the media can still come out and attack you and vilify you. We saw this with the Mike, I'm sorry, with the Ferguson shooting. You know, things just start snowballing, and now you've got someone who did everything they were supposed to do, um, and still ended up losing their job. They were vilified through the media. The family received threats. You know, so it is a very trying time, especially for law enforcement right now, because there is a palpable fear that if I do something and it's looked upon by the media as wrong, whether the facts support that or not,
mhm,
you know, I'm going to be, you know, out of a job. I could be prosecuted. Uh, my family could be, you know, run out of town. My family could be threatened, and all these things. When at the end of the day, all that person did was their job, and
mhm,
it doesn't get followed to the end as far as where it shows that that person, if this makes sense, the media will take a small chunk and make that the exciting byline or headline, but bury the real facts of it. And meanwhile, you have first responders who are paying a price for this exciting highlight
mm,
or byline
right.
so that, you know, a media company can sell advertising space. And, you know, unfortunately, right now, the society is we jump to a conclusion before all the facts are known. And a lot of lives, families have been just destroyed because of it.
Mm. So I have another question for you that is a difficult one for law enforcement officers and other first responders. It's about acknowledging that you might have anxiety or depression or other issues that might become problematic, that you might be a little bit reticent to speak up about it because you're afraid that that's the end of, that might be the end of career moves, or you might, lose your job if, you need to take a little break. These are real things that happen to people in all professions. I understand that these professions it's very stigmatizing. Do you have any kind of take on that whole thing? I mean, how do you get around something like that? Is there a way around this to keep
Well,
people safe that have these jobs and we want to be able to support?
well, absolutely, there's a way around it, and you know, the way around it is to talk openly about it. Mental health within the first responder community, of course, is a kind of a taboo subject. It has been for many, many years.
Mhm.
You know, first responders are the ones who are supposed to take care of other people. We don't. We're very A-type personalities. We don't believe that we need help ourselves, but in fact, we need help more than, you know, any other profession out there. Um, from my personal experience, for those who don't know, I was involved in a shooting in 2014. My partner was murdered. I was shot, and I had to kill the person who did all that. Um, I live with PTSD now, um, and I say I live with it because I no longer suffer from it, but I do live with it every day. I did suffer from it. I almost killed myself twice, um, uh, soon after the incident occurred. Um, I had to go through about 2.5 years of intense psychotherapy and um, to get to where I am now. And I feel I'm in a very good place. I do take medication to help kind of just it was, I reached a plateau with my psychotherapy, and I still felt like I was living under a little bit of a cloud. And so um, my therapist, my psychiatrist, was wonderful about never pushing medication on me until we got to that point. We started talking about it, and now I kind of kick myself in the head and say, I wish I had done that sooner. Um, so I take medication daily. Um, and one of the things that I did when I was going through all this, I started thinking, this was a tragic event, and what can I do to, try to make some positive things out of this. And so I went around and I started talking about it. I talked about my incident, and I talked about the struggles that I had very openly. And I found that I wasn't alone.
Right.
But the sad thing is, and what I discovered, and exactly what you pointed out, unfortunately, there are a lot of agencies in South Carolina and probably across the nation. But I know specifically in South Carolina, there are a lot of agencies where the agency heads are of the old school philosophy, suck it up and deal with it kind of philosophy. Which is funny because that's the number one reason why law enforcement officers have a 5-year life expectancy after they retire, because they end up committing suicide more often than not. And that's because all they did for their entire career was sucked it up and dealt with it. Basically, they just try to lock it all in a box, all the dead bodies, the dead children, the abused children, if they were involved in a traumatic event, a shooting, dead partners, whatever. It builds up inside of you.
Right.
And so to answer your question, what can we do? Well, what we do is we normalize talking about mental health. And the way you do that is to talk about it. And, we're never going to be able to change some minds that are, what we call the old guard in first responder agencies. And unfortunately, there are many in this state who are suffering from PTSD because they haven't been able to get the treatment they need because they're afraid they'll lose their job. And honestly, that's a real fear. Unfortunately, in some agencies, that is a legitimate fear. I could tell you stories from things I learned from going around the state. But I will tell you that it is true whether it's a small agency or a large agency. There are many that still look at mental health issues as a weakness. And what they don't understand is most of the time, if their officers got the same kind of preventive or reactive type of treatment that they would for a ulcer or a broken leg or whatever, that they'll be just fine. They just need a healthy outlet to be able to discuss whatever it is that's going on within them. And for me, it was my one incident that really kind of broke it was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. But you don't have to ever draw your weapon or see a partner get murdered or anything like that and not have the anxiety. And people don't understand that there's a thing called cumulative stress, or you could have one traumatic incident. The cumulative is almost more dangerous because it changes you so slowly over time that you don't notice it.
Right.
The stress of just doing the job and seeing the things that you see every day. You may start out in law enforcement having one beer a week. 5 years down the road, you're having a beer a night. 10 years down the road, you're having 3 beers a night. And those subtle changes are just as dangerous as having a single event that breaks the back and sends you into that. And not being comfortable to talk about these things, not being able to openly discuss these things is very detrimental. And again, I go back to my original answer. The way we fix it is we just talk about it. Right. It's okay. You're not weak for talking about the fact that you have anxiety. You're not weak if you talk about the fact that you had this one call that really shook you up and you can't sleep, or you keep seeing it over and over again. That's not weakness, that's strength when you're able to talk about it.
Exactly.
I'll share one quick story, which shows you that we have come a little bit of the way. Before I got out of law enforcement and after my incident, I remember I was in the squad room and I was talking with a sergeant and a lieutenant. We were in the squad room and we were talking about things, and I don't know how the subject came up, but the subject came up about what medications you're on. And all three of us, who had never talked about this kind of stuff, the lieutenant, the sergeant, and myself, we were all taking anti-anxiety medications. And we were having the conversation as if we were talking about football. And that, honestly, I mean, that's the way it should be.
Right.
You should be comfortable to say, hey, you know what? I'm taking this and it's really helping me. And someone else, well, I took that and it didn't help, but this helps me a lot. And I've had, and those kind of conversations where you're not afraid that someone's going to look down on you.
Right.
So we still have a long way to go.
Right.
But I think as the old guard kind of works their way out, and those of us who are talking about it continue to talk, and y'all continue doing what you're doing,
right,
that it'll make it okay, and it'll make it part of the day-to-day conversation.
Right. That's what we're trying to do. End the silence. Talk about it. Let's talk about this. This is real. If 1 in 5 youth and 1 in 4 adults live with a mental health condition, we always tell people, well, how many people do you have in this particular squad, or in this, in your police department? Well, if it's 1 in 4, how many do you think that would be, statistically speaking? I mean, it's not like nobody in this room has this. So yeah, I mean, we try to put the numbers out there and we try to make people see that, if you counted them off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, well, anybody that's number 4, stand up. And, statistically speaking, that could represent people that are living with anxiety or depression or OCD or, maybe bipolar disorder or some other issues. And, we need to talk about it. It's real.
And another thing too, I think that helps people feel uncomfortable with it is sometimes the terminology, like PTSD, people, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. They hear disorder and they think that there's something wrong with them.
Right.
And I always like to refer, a friend of mine years ago, an author by the name of Karen Rodwell Solomon, who's written some wonderful books. She calls it PTSI, and I agree with that, post-traumatic stress injury. Because the bottom line is, we all have a breaking point. Whether our breaking point is here or if it's up here, we all have one. Right. First responders, our emotional breaking point is much higher than the average person because it has to be. Otherwise, we couldn't do the job. But we all have that breaking point. And once you reach that breaking point, it's just like breaking a bone. Your arm can only go back so far, and then eventually it's going to break. And when it breaks, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Right. You have an injury.
Right.
So let's fix the injury. You may, for the rest of your life, you may always know when it's going to rain because you broke your arm. Right? You're going to know. So that injury is going to have some sort of possible long-lasting effect. The same thing with PTSI. You don't have to, I live with it now.
Right.
I know it's just like if I had broken my arm, I know from the break in my arm, then, I know when it's going to rain. There's a little residual there.
Right.
Well, with my PTSI, it's the same thing. I'm not weird. I don't have a disorder because, I had a horrible incident and it broke me to my core. That's an injury.
It is an injury.
And it doesn't mean that you're going to be screwed up for the rest of your life.
Right.
I mean, some people, they have a very difficult time coming back from it because of just the enormity of it. And they may have, they may suffer from it for the rest of their lives. It's just same thing with breaking a bone.
Right.
If you break a bone at an older age, then it's going to hurt you a lot more than when you did it when you're 20.
Right.
Everybody's different. And, you know, when we talk about those kinds of conditions, whether it be PTSD, PTSI, or anxiety or whatever, a lot of times first responders think, well, that must mean that I don't want to admit that that's going on because that means that I'm screwed up.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're screwed up. It means you're a human being.
Right.
Your arm's not screwed up if it breaks. It's just injured, and you fix it.
Right.
And that's the bottom line is, you know, sometimes you just need help and to fix something.
So yeah, these are conditions, and they're not anything that people should be afraid to talk about. I really, really appreciate the time that you have spent with me tonight. So is there anything else that you would like to share before we say goodnight?
No, just to remember to take care of yourselves, both physically and emotionally. Don't ignore one or the other. They're all just as important. Remember, have some sort of healthy outlet, whether it be working out or working gardening or working on automobiles, something non-first responder related that you can do to just kind of wash away whatever it is that you see every day and get your mind back into the normal world so you can go out and not embarrass your spouse with some horrible joke or something.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time, Michael, and you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. And thank y'all for what y'all are doing.
Okay, thanks.